So I'm Donald Matheson. I was brought up here in quiet old Dumfries. I love the outdoors, I love nature and walking these hills. I'm Scottish. At least I'm sure that's what you think when you see my name or hear my voice. But do you think the same thing when you see my face? I'm both black and white, and this is my home. So am I Scottish, or are people like me just Scot-ish?
Well, so the BBC in recent weeks have released two, I guess you could call, mini documentaries under the title Disclosure, with the second of which being released just a few days ago. That's what initially brought my attention to all this, because I've seen a few headlines regarding it. The first one, however, is the one that I've got up on the screen just now. And immediately we were presented with the narrator prattling off a bunch of descriptives that naturally your mind would have you believe is the description of a white dude, just so when the big bad face reveal comes in at the end, you're meant to pause and rethink, kind of giving a bit of a oomph to his points, you know. But I have to say, in all honesty, from watching this as well as watching the other one, but especially when it comes to this one with the point that's been put forth, it's pretty weak. In fact, I'd go as far as to say it's pretty pointless, really, when all said and done, because all bar one person in this documentary, as far as I'm aware, reveal that they are of mixed race descent. So they're half white, half black. Black and white, as they call it. Or as I would call it, half Scottish, half insert African ethnicity. You know? Now, as far as I'm concerned, if you have a Scottish parent, and your other parent comes from somewhere else, you're half Scottish. So ordinarily, I would be... Sorry, I'm a bit off put there by... It would be fucking Clive, wouldn't it? Fuck's sake. Where was I? Ordinarily I would fail to see just what it is these people are questioning. You know? Because I wouldn't have thought that anybody would have been arguing the point with them, that they're half Scottish. But therein lies the biggest issue that I've taken away from this, as far as I'm concerned, because my point to this is that I've always identified myself first and foremost as Scottish. Obviously I accept the white label, I don't completely disavow it, but first and foremost I am Scottish. I don't describe myself as white, I describe myself as Scottish. You know, I put my ethnicity first and foremost. And something that I've said for the longest time is one of the fundamental reasons behind that is because if we go along with the term white Scottish, it obviously opens the door to black Scottish, etc. And that's something that is relatively apparent throughout all of this. You know, they more often than not refer to white as opposed to Scottish. And that's also apparent throughout the duration of the second one as well. I mean, the argument that they make, or several of the arguments that they make, kind of can be boiled down to, I'm black, or I appear black, therefore people have a hard time seeing me as Scottish, etc, etc. And then to kind of argue against that, they'll make claims such as they know nowhere else, this is their home, etc, etc. And I just think that the overhanging point that's been pushed throughout the entirety of this is to kind of see the term Scottish as a mere label. Somebody that's born here, somebody that's moved here, somebody that plans to move here, they're all just as Scottish as each other, irrespective of where their parents come from, irrespective of anything. We're all just as Scottish as one another if we go down that train of thought, if we go down that route of thinking, I should say. And that's where I fundamentally disagree. And it's got nothing really to do with colour at all, because yes, I will not see a black person as Scottish. Not because I see white people as Scottish, but because the Scottish people are in and of themselves an ethnicity, similar in stock to the Irish, but just in general, the British Isles, for the most part, by and large, have a relatively shared DNA, goes back centuries and centuries, the closest thing that you could attribute to Indigenous. So, black people moving here, Asian people moving here, cannot be Scottish, because they do not have a parent that is Scottish. But if we go along with the points that are being made by these people, they're just as Scottish as everybody else because they live here. Now, as I said already, though, the vast majority of the people that are portrayed in this documentary, they have a Scottish parent. Therefore, they're arguing about whether or not they're seen it. What they claim that they're white and black, but I should be seen as Scottish too. Yes, you are Scottish. You're half Scottish if you've got a Scottish parent. This is what I'm saying. This is separation between white and Scottish that I will always stand by in terms of my ethnicity comes first, because this, as far as I can tell, correct me if I'm wrong, this seems to be their in. The people pushing this. I mean, this documentary in and of itself is relatively misleading, because in order to get you to think about things, they use a bunch of people that have a Scottish parent, apart from Graham Campbell, who really does showcase my point quite nicely in regards to hijacking an identity.
Every time I come back here, oh, are you visiting from London? Nobody thinks when they're asking me if it's a taxi driver, you are from someone else. Automatically, that's the assumption. And they ask me, are you from Jamaica? Well, kind of, yeah, I am. But I'm also Scottish. I've been here longer than I ever would have lived in Jamaica. You know, so I'm also Scottish now. I will say that now. But it's pretty clear that the majority of folks that I come across, particularly white folks, don't.
Particularly white folks? You mean Scottish folks? See, again, they keep referring to us as white folks. That's just brandishing you the same as a Polish person, an Armenian, etc., etc. No, Scottish. You bear in mind as well that, especially when it comes to Graham Campbell, the man that stood at an SNP conference several years ago and proudly professed to the conference that the intention of the future, or one of their goals for the future, that being the SNPs, was to have a non-racial identity for Scotland in the future. Therefore, you can see a white person, a black person, an Asian, all as Scottish. It's eradicating the concept of an ethnic group. But that there, a man that was born to African parents in England, moved to Scotland at some point in his life, and makes the claim, nice as you like, that he's Scottish now because he's lived in Scotland longer than he ever would have lived in Jamaica. You know, he doesn't have a Scottish parent, but because he lives here, he's Scottish. You know? I mean, he's got less of an argument than a black person or a brown, an Asian or whatever that was born here. But let me stress again that even if an Asian or a black person was born here, but both of their parents are from, say, Kenya or Ghana, they're not Scottish. They might have a British passport, they might be Scottish citizens or British citizens, but they're not Scottish, because to be Scottish, you have to have Scottish lineage. That's the point that I will continue to stress. But it's the point that seems to be glossed over by these documentaries, and in particular people like this.
West African. I'm pretty fair skinned. My daughter's got fair hair and blue eyes, right?
Now, I don't know where his mother's from, he doesn't say, but his father's African. So right off the bat, he's at least half African. Right? So I'm just saying. So if his mother is Scottish, then he's half Scottish. Case closed. End of documentary, you would have thought.
And, you know, she'll say, I'm a strong African woman. You are, darling. Now you put on your factor 50 before you go to the house, eh? When I grew up in the 60s, some people wouldn't allow you to be Scottish. Do you know what I mean? No, but where are you really from? Of Perth. No, but where were you born? Perth. Where's your ancestry? Well, my granddad fought in the Black Watch. He got a Distinguished Conduct Medal, and is that enough for you, right? And you had to fight to be Scottish. You had to, whereas...
Again, assuming that Scottish is a label. Scottish is an identity that can be applicable to anybody that's lives here, or was born here. I don't know this guy's background, so I'm not going to sit there and dissect it. My point is, though, that the overhanging point that this documentary is trying to imply is it's trying to normalise the concept that any BAME that lives here, any BAME that was born here, any BAME that's a second generation, etc., etc., they're all equally Scottish. No, they're fucking not. And now again, it's got nothing to do with being white, really, as far as I'm concerned, because a Polish person moving over here ain't Scottish. No.
Oh, the white bairns, they got to be Scottish.
Because they were Scottish, probably. Apart from the English, apart from the Welsh. Makes it a fucking ethnic group.
Who gets to be Scottish? Him? Her? Or them? You need Who is 100% authentically Scottish? Some people think, not me.
Again, you've got a Scottish parent, therefore you're half Scottish. But even that little B-roll clips that they played there, none of those people were Scottish. Because again, this isn't about racial appearance. This is about an ethnic group. Admittedly, it's not as large as it once was. It's been somewhat diluted over time. Nobody's disputing that. Just to bring back a counterpoint to the who's 100% authentically Scottish, you know? But we've got more of a claim to professing to be Scottish than the people that were included within that B-roll. Rest assured.
It speaks differently than, I don't know, maybe singing Donald Where's Your Trousers. Like, there is something in it that, like, it just, I don't know, I think I do. I connect to the blackness in spite of the fact that really, on paper, I have no reason to, other than that I am black.
At the last count, 20,000 Scots described their ethnicity as mixed. But that was 10 years ago. There will be many more now. This place and the people in it, their culture and heritage are becoming more and more blended. But
not everybody you meet is who they are on the face of it.
this is Aidan Donaghy. Look at him. Now look at me. Who's more Scottish?
Who's more Scottish? Again, it's an ethnic group. But see the point that I'm making? I'm not going to waste too much time on this because I've still got to go through briefly the other one as well. But the point is that they're trying to make it appear as if to be Scottish, the assumption is that it's decided if you're Scottish or not based purely on appearance. And they're trying to break that wall down. They're trying to break down those barriers because we're all Scottish, apparently. But they're completely glossing over the fact that the vast majority of Scots are an ethnic group. Or they share a lot more similar DNA than the likes of the BAMEs that are just waltzing into the country year on year. Who's more Scottish? Who appears more Scottish, etc.? I don't give a fuck, because it's not about appearance. And for the record, that guy looks Asian, but it's going to be a little hot mic drop because it's going to turn out that he's mixed race as well, but not of an Asian persuasion, but of an African persuasion as well. And again, if he's got a Scottish parent, this fundamentally renders this whole documentary fucking pointless. Because he's half Scottish, end of discussion.
All the stuff I like doing, the wild swimming, camping, going up the hills, the white stuff, has brought me so much joy.
The white stuff, you know, so just lumping in the Scottish with the English, with the Polish, with the Germans, with the French, etc.
But it also gave me a problem with my black friends, because they were like,
It's not what we do over here. That was a wake-up call to realise, okay, you know, white people don't really accept you, black people don't really accept you.
Scottish people.
And then for a while I was stuck in that limbo land of, well, neither seem to accept me, well then who am I?
and that idea of acceptance goes to the heart of the black and mixed experience in Scotland. How Scottish we feel. Are we accepted, or are we kind of tolerated?
Again, the black and mixed experience. Black people moving here that have got African parents or Asian parents are not Scottish. If you're mixed and one of your parents is Scottish, you're Scottish. I'm not going to keep repeating myself, but you see how this documentary continues to repeat itself. And they constantly provide B-roll of all these BAMEs, jet black BAMEs, who presumably are immigrants, who presumably ain't got a Scottish parent. Therefore, they are not Scottish. But if we follow their train of thought, their logic, they are Scottish because they live here. No.
Does weigh you down after a while, and it doesn't build up resilience like you think. It builds up just a level of, okay, you know, maybe I don't belong here, maybe I'm not Scottish, maybe...
But if you've got a Scottish parent, you are. Again, they're portraying this from the angle that Scottish is an identity that's applicable, a label that's applicable to anybody. And they're struggling with that because, for the most part, currently as things stand, the Scottish label was only applicable to whites. Ignoring the fact that if you have a Scottish parent, you're by default half Scottish, whether we like it or not.
Scotland likes to think of itself as a welcoming and accepting nation.
My intention was to let that introduction to the second documentary play out a little bit more, but that line there that you just heard really fucking irritates me, purely for the fact that I've heard it time after time after time after time again. Every article, every video, whether it's YouTube or it's a news piece, etc., it doesn't matter, or in this instance a BBC documentary, it's the same line all the time. That apparently in Scotland, here in Scotland, we all pride ourselves on being above racism as a tolerant nation. You know, racism doesn't exist here. And then they turn around and go, well, I think you'll find that it does. You know, we've got a lot to learn, etc., etc. I don't know anybody. I don't... yeah, not that I have many conversations about these things in real life, but nonetheless, I don't know anybody that at any point has ever turned around and said that Scotland is not a racist nation. I'm not saying it is, but my point is I don't know anybody that brags about the fact that we see ourselves as a non-racist nation. I'm pretty sure this is an argument that these people have concocted in order to push their points.
You are welcome here. The Scotland we seek is open, welcoming, diverse and inclusive.
But the reality is pretty shocking.
You go to the shop and then the person who's serving at the shop is like, why did you come here? Are you planning to return to your country?
Children facing abuse because of the colour of their skin.
All the boys came and gathered around me, just kept shouting the N-word at me.
Adults changing the way they work simply to keep the peace.
I've taken a step back now. If they can see a Caucasian staff member at the front, it allows for the customer to be a bit more at ease.
In Scotland in 2022, your skin colour makes it more likely that you will live in poverty, are a victim of hate crime, or end up in prison. Tonight on Disclosure, I'm investigating the truth about Scotland and racism. I'm Jean Johansson. I don't usually do these kind of programmes. In fact, you probably know me better from being the bubbly presenter on A Place in the Sun or The One Show.
I grew up here in Port Glasgow in the 80s and 90s, and I have to admit I didn't face much racism at all. In fact, I felt quite protected, loved and very much part of the community.
But the Black Lives Matter movement in 2020 made me start to re-evaluate even my own experience growing up. This is a Scotland I love and care deeply about, and to think there's racism continuing to happen here that we don't talk about, and that one day my own son or nieces might be the victim of, really frightens me.
Now, the second documentary kind of focuses more on the narrator or the presenter going around different parts of what I would presume you can classify as the BAME community, starting off with a young schoolgirl who I presume is mixed again. She looks mixed anyway. Then the Asian guy on the screen who works in a shop, going on to Anam Anwar, everybody's favourite anti-racist lawyer, who of course brings up Sheku Bayu. Lo and behold, there's on the screen. To this guy who I will come on to, who works, well, he's part of the Edinburgh University, going on to this woman here who's now the rector, if I'm not mistaken, of Edinburgh University. And does she talk to anybody else? Oh yeah, some BAME guy who started some BAME only, presumably, football team or football network, etc., in order to try and get more BAMEs signed via talent scouts, etc., etc. I'm not going to focus too much on the first story or the second story, purely for the fact that I'm not taking anything away from the stories that they proclaim happened to them. I have to say, though, on the other hand, it's somewhat anecdotal to a certain extent, some of the claims that are made. But I can't say for certain whether or not they're true or not. If they are, of course, they're fucking sad, especially for this young girl that was apparently racially bullied in school. Bullying, irrespective of what form it takes, I think it's abhorrent. And that would go for racist bullying as well. But that said, if it wasn't that, they would just bully another kid for something else. But an example of a racist bullying in school does not really go to show the larger picture of racism as a whole in Scotland. And the same can be said for the racist abuse that the Asian man in the store was the victim of, with him concluding towards the end that he's now got somebody who's white, quote unquote, or Scottish presumably, working at the front of the store because he feels that it makes people coming into the store feel a bit more comfortable. Don't know where he drew that conclusion from, but nonetheless, that's his hot take. But there's a common theme throughout the portions of this that I wanted to touch upon, because it's something I've touched upon a few times. She sort of, the narrator or the presenter, whatever you will, sort of concludes each little segment with a similar theme that crops up in many videos that I make regarding anti-racism, etc., which you'll see here, if I can just get it back to the bits at the start.
Talking to Tola's really, it's made me feel ashamed. I'm ashamed for every adult involved in that situation. I'm ashamed of the parents of the kids that were involved in that situation. That might be wrong, but that's how I feel. And I'm a bit ashamed of myself because I think I've been walking around with my head in the clouds when it comes to racism in Scotland. I think I've been a bit naive, and I'm ashamed that I think I've been ignoring it a little bit, and Tola's really brought it right in my face where I can't deny it.
Tola's experiences are unfortunately not unique. In the 2 school years between 2018 and 2020, more than 2,200 racist incidents were reported.
Now, naturally, a racist incident is any incident that occurs where the victim, quote-unquote victim or alleged victim, perceives the incident to have occurred out of malice or racism. So it's got nothing to do with whether or not the actual event itself, the perpetrators involved, etc., were racist, were displaying racist behaviours, said anything remotely racist. It just solely relies on whether or not the victim felt that the scenario in question occurred due to some form of racism. Secondly, the thing to note there is reported. That doesn't mean that it led to anything substantial. Doesn't mean that it led to proof, doesn't mean that it led to punishment, etc. It just simply means reported. Now, in this day and age, when racism can mean whatever the fuck they want it to mean, it's kind of hard to see that or take that, as far as I'm concerned, at face value and get shocked by it. Now, if every incident of what 2,251 was similar in nature to the one described by the female who was first interviewed, then naturally that'd be quite harrowing. But the reality of the matter is, a lot of these incidents, or at the very, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt, half of these incidents will be incidents that either didn't fucking occur at all, or were simply things that the victim in question felt happened to them due to racism.
In our schools. Tola believes her school days would have been better if there'd been even one black teacher. But to meet the target of having 4% minority ethnic teachers by 2030, more than 130 will have to be recruited every year.
To meet that target of 4% by 2030, she felt if there was at least one black teacher, things would have been different. But let's just disregard that for a second. I can understand that if you're in a school that's all white, you might want somebody that represents you or looks like you, so you can feel a bit more comfortable, which kind of flies in the face of this bullshit that we're all supposed to be one. But that point there again, something that I have stressed in so many, or highlighted in so many videos because it gets brought up every time, where they talk about proportionate representation. So 4% by 2030 is the target, or was the target, to get into the teaching workforce, make them BAME. 4% of the teaching workforce would be BAME to represent 4% of the population. That, according to the 2011 census, was BAME. So naturally, when the next census comes out, and if it showcases 10% BAME, that would mean that they were going to have to update these targets in order to have 10% of the teaching workforce to be BAME. And because it's not currently representative or reflective or equal on paper, aka because it's currently not 4% BAME in the teaching workforce to represent 4% of the population, that somehow indicates racial inequality. I fucking hate it when they bring this nonsense up. I really do.
These experiences aren't limited to education. In fact, in the past 2 years, race hate crime figures have been rising. Just over 3,000 were reported in the year 2020-21.
Again, reports. That's not convictions. Reports. And it's the same way that they proclaim that the transgender hate crimes are on the rise. Every single marginalised group you can think of, the hate crimes are on the rise. And again, that kind of goes back to a point I made a couple of minutes ago. The same thing applies with race incidents or racial incidents, etc., to hate crimes or accusations of hate crimes. You know, they can be whatever the victim perceives it to be. If the victim perceives the event in question to have happened out of and to be derived from malice, etc., they will then report it as a hate crime, irrespective of whether or not there was any hate or malice or prejudice involved.
Just over 3,000 were reported in the year 2020-21. This means last year, on average, 9 racist hate crimes were reported every single day in Scotland.
Report, again, being the operative word.
Same day, we caught them on CCTV and I confronted them, and she just continually refused to leave and was basically calling me the P word.
So did you report the incident with the young girl?
I did, but at the time when the police originally came to the store, I actually said no, I just don't want her in my store. I don't want to take it any further. One, I feel just like the court procedures and everything is very lengthy, and it's actually wasting a lot more of my time than hers. But one of the police officers was of Asian background, and he looked at me disappointed when I said I don't want to take it further. And when she said it again, that changed my mind, and he gave me that confidence to say, you know, I will take it further, and it also gave me a confidence that I'm not alone.
So that was the second reference, albeit not as blatant as the first one, but the second reference nonetheless to representation in some shape or form.
Count how many black judges you have in Scotland. The answer at the time was 0. How many black senior officers do you have in Scotland? The answer was 0. How many black heads of boards and major companies in this country in Scotland that you had? The answer was 0. How many black heads of school do you have? The answer was 0. 22 years later, the answer is predominantly still 0.
And Amar is right. Representation of ethnic minorities in Scottish institutions continues to be a major issue. Statistics from 2020 show the proportion of police officers in Scotland from an ethnic minority was just 1.4%. Yet, at the last census 11 years ago, 4% of Scotland's population was from a black, Asian or minority ethnic background.
As I said, the running theme throughout all of this is to conclude each segment with more references to proportional representation, or just the fact that there's a lack of representation. And yet again on screen you have something that I have reiterated so many times till I've been blue in the face on several occasions. There it is again in black and white. Scotland BAME police proportion 1.4 in 2020. And that is just shocking. That is a shocking statistic because apparently, according to the 2011 census, the BAME population of Scotland was 4%. Therefore, we should have 4% of the police in Scotland being BAME. Why? To represent the population census, or from the census in 2011. And until such a time as that is achieved, there is still unequal representation. It's just fucking cancer. It really is. And if anything, it really undermines the whole point of what this documentary is allegedly trying to portray. Because yet again, the same anti-racist nonsense seems to be seeping through.
And by 2031, that's predicted to rise to 7%. So what is life really like for minorities? I met with Nasser Mir, Professor of Race, Identity and Citizenship at the University of Edinburgh.
About a third of black and ethnic minorities in Scotland say that they routinely experience racial discrimination, and it varies.
And again, define that. You know, it's very easy to say that they routinely face racial discrimination, but in this day and age when the term racism, or racist even, it means whatever they want it to mean, and encompasses things such as microaggressions, for fuck's sake, it's really difficult to take that seriously. What are we referring to here? Because bear in mind, a microaggression is defined as discriminatory.
Some groups in Scotland, so for black groups in Scotland, about 45% will say that they've experienced racial discrimination in the last 2 years. And one of the striking things is that about 60% of the people who say they have experienced racial discrimination haven't reported it to any kind of authority.
Yeah, well, that's very easy to say, but that's anecdotal at best, and you can't. I hate when they do that. You cannot use that as proof.
5%, you say that's high, way too high for me, because I've sort of grown up thinking, I'm glad I grew up in Scotland, I'm glad it wasn't England, but we have the same problems as England, and the numbers are that high.
Yeah, I think that's
It's very striking that the more quote-unquote diverse Scotland gets, the worse this problem seems to be, yet diversity is our strength, eh?
right. I think that the experience of racial discrimination in Scotland is very real, is very true.
And in my experience, these public attitudes are very accurate.
Okay. Right, okay. So this is the picture we're going to post?
Yes. Even when I tweeted out telling people I was doing this programme, I was met with a barrage of abuse.
I've got Nazi salutes on here, I don't know why.
A Nazi salute, okay. Find it difficult to believe, but I'll take it at face value, take it at our word, it's Twitter for fuck's sake.
Why anyone would post a picture of that.
Nor do I, but it's pretty convenient.
Someone in a white hood.
Oh yeah.
And I can already see the tribalism between football clubs starting, which is quite strange to me because this is not about football, this is about racism. They're using their 120 characters basically to ignore the points I'm making and start the whataboutery. And that's Scotland in 2022, right here.
Yeah, and using the term whataboutery is nothing short of gaslighting as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
There's another fact about life for people of colour in modern Scotland that no one wants to talk about. And that's poverty.
So poverty is a really good example of the issue of ethnic and racial disparities in Scotland. About 44% of all black and ethnic minorities in Scotland today are deemed to be living in poverty, compared with about 24% for white groups.
Just want to come in there quickly again. White groups, I mean Scottish, and then insert other groups. But second of all, I don't know the statistics off by hand in order to really give a strong enough point to either counteract that or elaborate too much further on it, but given the differences in percentages in terms of, you know, how many people that are considered white in Scotland in comparison, there's still a hell of a lot of people that are white that are in poverty as well. I don't think it's got fuck all to do. In fact, I know for a fact it's got F all to do with the fact, simply for the fact that you're classified as BAME. Yeah. And again, they did the same shit down in England at some point, Theresa May, when she was in charge. The ethnicity pay gap, which I'm pretty sure this guy brings up, by the way, unironically. And I remember making a video on it at the time, where I did a little bit of digging, and I mean a little bit of digging. And it transpired, if I remember rightly, it was either Bangladeshi or Indian. The Indian group were the overall, on average, highest earners in the UK. But the entire purpose of the ethnicity pay gap report, etc., was to showcase the differences, the disparities of all the ethnic groups in the UK, how much they were getting paid on average in comparison to their quote-unquote white counterparts, but they disregarded the top earners, which weren't white. You know, and if there was institutionalised racism that was rife, and that there was barriers holding back BAMEs, then that group would not be at the top.
Worse for kids, so the number of children deemed to be living in poverty and growing up in poverty is about half of all black and ethnic minorities. I think it's about 48%, compared with about 24% or a quarter for white majority groups.
Again, those numbers are too high for me and quite scary because it's children. What are the reasons for that?
There's a very significant underemployment rate in Scotland for black and ethnic minorities. They're more likely to be unemployed. But there's also a significant pay gap in Scotland for black and ethnic minorities, about 10%.
So when you say black and...
About 10% of a non-existent pay gap. I say non-existent because it's been debunked.
Ethnic minorities are more likely to be unemployed. Why are they not being employed?
I think there's something about the nature of the institutions of employment, the companies, the expectations of what a co-worker should look like and be like, that has a bearing on the fact that despite having the same skills and qualifications, black and ethnic minorities in Scotland are much less likely to be shortlisted for interview.
Shortlisted for an interview, oh yeah. And I made this argument before, and I realised cautious of time, you know, because they're a minority, this is where the issue stems from. Because if 100 people apply for a job and 99 of those people are white, and one of those people is BAME, or just for the 4% of the population analysis, I'll say 4 of them are BAME and 96 of them are white. And they're all applying for the same job. Stands to reason that on average, purely because of the sheer amount of them, the likelihood is the person that will get that job will be somebody who is classified as white. But you have to take into consideration that that white person was not just going up against the 4 BAMEs, they were going up against the other 95 whites. You know, how many whites do not get shortlisted for interviews? It just looks a lot more shocking because they're a minority. It disregards the amount of whites that will simultaneously be ignored when it comes to shortlisting.
And those from marginalised communities continue to face abuse. In a survey last year, 75% of Muslims said Islamophobia is a regular issue in Scottish society. 78% said the problem was getting worse.
Yeah, I covered this last year, if I'm not mistaken, and if from what I remember rightly, casting my mind back again, this came about at the same sort of time when the definition of Islamophobia was accepted into Scottish law. But again, the definition of Islamophobia has grown arms and legs over time as well. And it's one of those things that's relatively anecdotal at best, until it leads to some sort of concrete conclusion in terms of convictions, etc. I find it difficult to believe, because anybody could have participated in these studies, these surveys, etc. You can't use that as gospel truth. Anyway.
I still believe that Scotland is not a racist country, if you want to say it like that. The racists are the minority. Please tell me you feel the same.
I think that there is now a significant minority that are anti-racist. I think there is a minority that are racist that is getting less and less. But the problem is the majority in the middle that think that they don't want to speak out. And that still exists.
I think allyship is really important. That is one thing that I think for our kids' generation is really going to be what changes things. Their white classmates speaking out, you know, their white college mates.
The white, you mean Scottish? And again, anti-racist. What does that mean? It's critical race theory, to put it politely. But the core tenet of that, of course, is to attack whiteness, because it comes from the belief that there's no such thing as race. So whiteness is the issue. Racialised groups and the white race, etc. all needs to be deconstructed. And again, it kind of harkens back to a point I made at the start. That's why you need to accept, reclaim your ethnic identity as opposed to the labels of white and black, etc. That's not to suggest that you should completely denounce white, but I'm just saying. However, to sort of conclude, I'll let this play on a little bit more, but you know, he goes on about the majority of people don't really speak out. The majority of people aren't really switched on one way or the other. So, kind of showcases though what's going on here, yeah? Whether that be via the educational institutions or whether that be TV propaganda, etc. They're trying to target that demographic of people by portraying the anti-racist narrative.
You know, the people in the pub that are going to say that joke's not okay with me, I really hope that we're raising a generation that are going to speak up.
It's projects like this that really inspire me. This primary school in Dundee are forcing the conversation with a project called Don't Recycle Racism, which doesn't shy away from the issues we need to address.
We need to address. But again, there's a big difference between telling a class not to be racist, etc. There's a big difference between that and educating them, quote unquote, on the anti-racist ideology. Big fucking difference. But that is the misleading factor that comes up time and time again. Because they will portray it, present it as, we're simply teaching the children not to be racist. and to appreciate difference, etc. But the reality of the matter is that the way that they're getting to that point is by introducing children to anti-racism. Long gone are the days where you are taught to just treat everybody how you'd want to be treated. And now we enter the days where we need to tell them all about equity or lack thereof, representation or lack thereof, microaggressions, whiteness, etc., etc. The list goes on. The list goes on.
Talk to me about what you've been learning about racism.
We've been learning of why it's such a big problem and why it should not be used and what we could do to help get rid of it.
We've learned that it's a really good idea to try and listen to the person who's been affected by it.
Has that helped you learn more maybe about people that are victims? Do you understand more now?
Yeah, I definitely do. Like, before we started this project, I didn't know much about racism. I just knew it was a bad thing.
And what made you want to get involved in this group and this campaign?
Well, because some of the people that I know have been a victim of racism or have witnessed it before. And I just wanted to help try and stop it.
And knowing there are now schools and people in Scotland actively trying to encourage cohesion and eliminate racism does give me some hope. Some hope that my own kid and his generation will grow up in a more inclusive world. But even with this, it's clear from speaking to everyone else on this journey, Scotland still has a problem with racism.